Glenn Diesen is a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway and is now joining us live from Oslo. Glenn Diesen, welcome to the show, and it's good to see you. There's a lot of talk everywhere. We are talking about Qatar, we are talking about Egypt, we are talking about Israel. But Israel and Hamas are not listening. Who will they listen to?
That's a good question. I think that both Netanyahu and Hamas have a certain interest in continuing this fight. I think this war will definitely not stop without outside pressure. Obviously, the United States is key in order to put pressure on Israel. And a lot of the Arab neighbors would have to put a lot of pressure on the United States in order for it to do so. But also, I think it's correct to recognize that Hamas itself probably has a huge interest in continuing this conflict, as the ability of Hamas to pull in other neighbors into this war would be the only way for it to prevail. So I think there's too many incentives to continue this war, and a complete absence of those forces who are able to constrain it.
Glenn, there are so many leaders who are talking about a two-state solution. They are also talking about diplomacy. But what kind of diplomacy are we talking about here? Which kind of diplomacy will work? And which kind of diplomacy will Israel and Hamas agree to?
Well, this is a key problem. I think Hamas would never be comfortable with Israel at all. And meanwhile, the Israelis, I think, have undermined the Palestinian government in the West Bank deliberately. I mean, this is not a big secret that Netanyahu himself was providing some support for Hamas for years, simply because it allowed them to split the Palestinians and then continue to change realities on the ground. And this is why we also have an absence of a political settlement, because the agreement which we have is the two-state solution. However, Israel and the United States have undermined this pretty much from day one. They claim to, argue that this is the sole solution, but at the same time, they're seeking to expand the settlements and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, this is a problem, because once we've abandoned the two-state solution, effectively made it dead, which the Israeli expansion has done, there's no other settlements, because what you do when there are about 50-50 in terms of Jewish and Palestinian ethnic groups, you can't have any Jewish state anymore unless it's a complete apartheid state, or if you ethnically cleanse out the millions of Palestinians. So this is the problem. Unless we're going to be stuck with those two solutions, which don't work, there has to be a two-state solution. But this has been undermined for so long now that I simply do not see a solution to this conflict.
Glenn, now that you've talked about solutions, we were seeing a sort of solution coming through with the truces that were, made twice. But now that truce has been broken, and now there's blame game. Israel blames Hamas for breaking the truce, and Hamas also does blame Israel for breaking the truce. When we're talking about a ceasefire, because there are so many people, there are so many leaders who are saying that a humanitarian ceasefire is not enough. There needs to be a complete ceasefire. Will that happen anytime soon?
Well, I doubt it. I mean, both sides accuse each other, and both are probably correct to some extent. But we also have to keep in mind, even before this really started, this temporary humanitarian pause, we saw that Netanyahu was very openly stating once the temporary pause is over, they will come back with full force. He said so very explicitly. And I think that this temporary truce was necessary, because what Hamas was offering was to hand over to a prisoner exchange. So Netanyahu couldn't really afford to say no, given his absence of popularity in Israel. So, of course, he had to accept this and get the hostages back, because this was, of course, a key objective of Israel as well. But once it's over, I think they will continue. They say that their objective is to exterminate Hamas. But the concern, of course, for most of the world is that it's also looking to exterminate the Palestinians, if not kill them, I mean, drive them out of Gaza, and then possibly going after the West Bank as well. So I think that this is the key problem we're faced with, that there was no intention, effectively, of prolonging this truce, which is what they've been quite open about as well. So,
Glenn, before I let you go, very quickly, is this criteria of releasing hostages really necessary?
Well, I think it's a key incentive, but it's also, of course, having humanitarian aid coming in. But again, I think the problem is it's the assumption that they want to have humanitarian aid, because when you block off water, communication, and effectively you're destroying critical infrastructure and calling for the population to move south so you can occupy the north of Gaza, there's an assumption there that humanitarian aid is not the key objective, but also without the hostages, I don't think it's the only necessary component, but I think that was the most attractive, most important component.
All right, I've been talking to Professor of International Relations at University of Southeastern Norway, Glenn Diesen. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
My pleasure.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.